Have you ever heard of Hans Loritz, notoriously known as the Beast of Sachsenhausen? His story, shrouded in the dark folds of history, is a chilling testament to the complexities of human nature and the horrific capacities of power. Born into a seemingly ordinary life, Loritz's journey into infamy begins with his early years and military service, revealing the first layers of a man who would become a symbol of terror in one of history's darkest chapters. Early life and military service. Hans Loritz, whose name would later echo as the Beast of Sachsenhausen, began his journey in the humble settings of Augsburg, Bavaria, on December 21, 1895. Born to a police officer, his life initially followed an unremarkable path. After completing primary school, Loritz stepped into the world of bakery, embracing the trade of a baker. Yet, the simplicity of these early days gave little indication of the ominous path his life would eventually take. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 marked a significant turning point in Loritz's life. With a sense of duty perhaps inherited from his father, he volunteered in the Bavarian army, which had been integrated into the larger German army since 1870. His initial assignments were in the 3rd Infantry Regiment. This period was crucial in shaping Loritz's future. The experiences of war and the harsh realities of military life undoubtedly left an indelible mark on his psyche. War is a crucible that forges and breaks men in unequal measures. For Loritz, the brutal trenches of the Western Front, particularly in Flanders, were a harrowing backdrop. He suffered multiple injuries, including a gas attack that left lingering effects, haunting him for the rest of his life. Despite these adversities, or perhaps because of them, Loritz ascended to the rank of sergeant in 1917. This promotion signified not just a rise in rank, but also a shift in his military career as he transferred to the fledgling German Air Force as a gunner. July 1918 brought yet another twist in Loritz's war story when his aircraft was shot down over France. The crash left him severely injured, and he subsequently became a prisoner of war, confined to a labor camp on the Somme. His release in September 1920 marked the end of a chapter filled with violence, suffering, and survival, elements that would later resurface in his life in a more sinister form. Returning to civilian life, Loritz joined his father in the Augsburg police force, serving as a motorcycle policeman. The post-war era was a tumultuous time in Germany, with political and economic instability rife. It's plausible that during this period, Loritz's beliefs and attitudes began to harden, influenced by the chaotic environment and his own war experiences. He married in 1922 and became a father, but this domesticity was overshadowed by the brewing storm of his future endeavors. The interwar period was a crucible of political extremism in Germany, and Loritz was not immune to these currents. His career took a dark turn when, in 1927, he was involved in a scandal where he coerced a victim to provide false testimony to protect a friend. This incident led to his departure from the police force in 1928. Despite his exit, the city of Augsburg provided him with a position at the municipal gas plant, a gesture possibly influenced by his status as a war veteran. As the 1930s dawned, Germany was ripe for the rise of extremist ideologies, and Loritz found himself drawn to the burgeoning Nazi movement. In 1930, he joined the SS, an organization that would soon play a central role in the horrors of the Holocaust. His SS membership number, 4,165, indicated his early involvement in this infamous group, joining the Nazi Party and SS. As the shadows of extremism crept over Germany in the early 1930s, Hans Loritz found himself at a crossroads that would significantly shape his future. His transition from a war veteran and former policeman to an SS officer in the Nazi regime was not just a change in profession, but a complete transformation of identity and ideology. Loritz's induction into the Nazi Party in 1930 marked the start of a dark chapter in his life. The Nazi Party, with its radical ideas and promises of national rejuvenation, appealed to many who, like Loritz, felt disillusioned and betrayed by the post, World War I Treaty of Versailles, and the subsequent economic hardships. His early involvement in the party indicated a deep-seated alignment with its ideologies, or at the very least, an opportunistic stance to advance his own position in a rapidly changing political landscape. Joining the SS, the paramilitary organization under the leadership of Heinrich Himmler, was a significant step for Loritz. The SS, Schutzstaffel or Protection Squadron, was at the forefront of the Nazi regime's most brutal policies, including the enforcement of racial laws and the administration of concentration camps. Loritz's SS number, 4165, placed him among the early members, signifying his commitment to the organization and its ideologies from its nascent stages. Loritz's rise within the SS was meteoric. His background as a war veteran and his experience in the police force made him an ideal candidate for the organization, which valued military discipline and unwavering loyalty. By the end of 1933, Loritz had made a name for himself within the SS ranks. His appointment as the head of the SS Welfare Committee in Dachau was a significant, albeit complex, milestone. On the surface, this role was intended to support SS members and their families. However, it also placed Loritz in close proximity to the concentration camp system, which would later define his notorious legacy. His tenure at Dachau was a turning point. While initially a punishment for a dispute at the Nuremberg rally, this role inadvertently provided Loritz with a deep understanding of the concentration camp system. He became familiar with the camp's operations and its commandant, Theodor Eicke, a fellow war veteran and policeman. Eicke and Loritz shared a fierce ambition and a ruthless approach to their duties, which would later manifest in the brutal administration of the camps under their control. In February 1934, Loritz sought a transfer to the Dachau concentration camp, indicating his eagerness to be more directly involved in the regime's oppressive machinery. This move was strategically significant for Loritz, as Dachau was the model for all subsequent concentration camps. Here, Loritz's skills in organization and discipline were put to the ultimate test. His role in transforming the camp's guard unit from a disorganized group into a disciplined, efficient force won him accolades from his superiors. Loritz's time at Dachau was marked by increasing violence and repression. Under his command, the camp saw a rapid escalation in brutality. The transformation of Dachau into a model of order and control was achieved through methods that were inhuman and merciless. Loritz's approach to management was not just about maintaining order, but instilling fear, both among the prisoners and the guards. His success at Dachau led to his promotion to Oberführer, senior leader, and his appointment as the commandant of Esterwagen concentration camp in 1935. At Esterwagen, Loritz continued his brutal methods. His ability to maintain order through terror and violence was a valued asset in the eyes of the Nazi leadership. Rise to power in the concentration camp system. Hans Loritz's ascension within the ranks of the Nazi regime's concentration camp system paints a picture of a man whose brutality and administrative efficiency were both feared and revered. This chapter in Loritz's life is a stark illustration of how personal ambition and ideological fanaticism can drive one to commit unspeakable atrocities. Upon his promotion to Oberführer in 1936, Loritz's role in the concentration camp system took on a new dimension. He was appointed as the commandant of Sachsenhausen concentration camp, a position that would earn him the notorious title of the Beast of Sachsenhausen. This appointment was a clear indication of the trust the Nazi hierarchy placed in his abilities to run a camp that was both a symbol of terror and a training ground for SS officers. At Sachsenhausen, Loritz's impact was immediate and terrifying. He initiated a series of reforms aimed at increasing the efficiency and brutality of the camp. His management style was characterized by a strict regime of discipline and punishment, both for the prisoners and the SS guards. Loritz believed that fear was the most effective tool for maintaining order, and he employed it without hesitation or mercy. The camp under Loritz underwent significant physical expansion. More barracks were constructed to accommodate the increasing number of prisoners, These expansions were not aimed at improving living conditions, but were a direct response to the regime's escalating arrests and incarcerations. The enlargement of Sachsenhausen mirrored the growing scale of the Nazi persecution. Loritz's command also saw an intensification of forced labor within the camp. Prisoners were subjected to grueling work, often without adequate food, clothing, or medical care. This systematic exploitation was part of the broader Nazi policy of using concentration camps as sites of forced labor to support the war effort. Under Loritz, Sachsenhausen became a cog in the machine of the Third Reich's industrial and military ambitions. One of the most chilling aspects of Loritz's tenure at Sachsenhausen was his approach to discipline and punishment. He was known for his innovative and particularly cruel methods of torture. These practices were not only aimed at punishing perceived infractions, but also served as a mechanism to instill a constant state of fear among the inmate population. Loritz's methods were so brutal that they often resulted in the death or permanent injury of prisoners. The escalation of violence under Loritz's command was not limited to physical abuse. Psychological torture was also a tool he frequently employed. He understood the power of fear and uncertainty, and he used it to break the spirit of the prisoners. This psychological warfare was an integral part of his strategy to maintain control over the camp. Loritz's administration of Sachsenhausen also reflected the broader policies of the Nazi regime, particularly in terms of racial persecution. Jewish prisoners, in particular, were subjected to even more severe forms of abuse and degradation. Under Loritz, Sachsenhausen became a place where the Nazis, anti-Semitic ideologies were enacted with ruthless efficiency. Despite the horrific conditions he fostered at Sachsenhausen, Loritz was regarded as an effective leader by his superiors. His ability to maintain order, increase productivity, and implement the regime's policies made him a valued member of the SS. His leadership style, though brutal, was seen as a model for other concentration camp commandants. However, Loritz's methods began to attract criticism even within the SS. Some viewed his extreme brutality as counterproductive and feared it could lead to unrest or rebellion within the camps. This internal criticism was a testament to the extent of Loritz's cruelty, which stood out even within the brutal framework of the Nazi concentration camp system. The transformation of Sachsenhausen. When Hans Loritz was appointed as the commandant of Sachsenhausen concentration camp in 1936, he embarked on a mission to transform the camp into an epitome of Nazi ideology and efficiency. This period of transformation under Loritz's leadership was marked by systematic brutality, architectural expansion, and the establishment of Sachsenhausen as a central figure in the Nazi concentration camp system. Upon his arrival at Sachsenhausen, Loritz immediately set about implementing a regime that was both rigorous and ruthless. He was driven by a vision to make Sachsenhausen not just a place of incarceration, but a model camp that reflected the principles of order, discipline, and absolute control that were central to Nazi ideology. His methods were extreme, and his management style was characterized by a relentless pursuit of efficiency, often at the cost of human life. The physical transformation of Sachsenhausen under Loritz was significant. The camp, initially designed to hold around 10,000 prisoners, underwent extensive expansions to accommodate the growing number of detainees. These expansions included the construction of additional barracks, workshops, and administrative buildings. Loritz oversaw these developments with an iron fist, ensuring that the camp's layout facilitated easy surveillance and control. Under Loritz, Sachsenhausen became a hub of forced labor. Prisoners were subjected to backbreaking work in various industries, including brickworks, a shoe testing track, and armaments production. The labor was not just a means of contributing to the Nazi war effort, but also a tool of oppression and dehumanization. Loritz ensured that the work was both exhausting and dangerous, with little regard for the safety or well-being of the prisoners. The transformation of Sachsenhausen also saw the introduction of more systematic and brutal methods of punishment. Loritz was notorious for his sadistic practices, including severe beatings, public hangings, and the use of a special whipping bench. He also implemented a regime of psychological torture, including mock executions and relentless harassment. These methods were intended to break the spirit of the prisoners and reinforce the absolute power of the SS. Loritz's administration marked a period of increased violence and mortality rates within the camp. The harsh conditions, combined with inadequate food and medical care, led to a significant rise in deaths due to disease, exhaustion, and outright murder. Loritz viewed these deaths not as a tragedy, but as a necessary byproduct of maintaining order and discipline within the camp. One of the most heinous aspects of Loritz's tenure at Sachsenhausen was his treatment of Jewish prisoners. Reflecting the Nazi regime's escalating anti-Semitic policies, Loritz subjected Jewish inmates to even more severe abuse. They were often isolated, given the harshest tasks, and were the frequent targets of Loritz's most brutal punishments. This treatment was a clear manifestation of the Nazi policy of racial hatred and genocide. Loritz also played a significant role in the implementation of the T4 euthanasia program at Sachsenhausen. Under this program, disabled and sick prisoners were systematically murdered. This barbaric policy was a grim indicator of the Nazi regime's disregard for human life, and Loritz was a willing and efficient executor of this policy. The systematic brutality. Hans Loritz's tenure as commandant of Sachsenhausen concentration camp was marked by a period of systematic and extreme brutality. This chapter in the camp's history is a harrowing account of the methods of torture, repression, and dehumanization that Loritz employed to enforce Nazi ideology and maintain absolute control. From the moment Loritz took command in 1936, he established an atmosphere of relentless terror. His approach to discipline was uncompromising, employing tactics that were as psychologically damaging as they were physically brutal. The camp's daily routine was structured to dehumanize inmates, stripping them of their identity and reducing them to mere numbers in the Nazi system of oppression. Loritz was known for his sadistic methods of punishment. He often resorted to physical violence to enforce discipline, employing a variety of tools designed to inflict maximum pain and humiliation. One of his notorious innovations was the introduction of a special whipping bench, where prisoners were bound and beaten mercilessly. This method of punishment was not only a means of exerting control, but also served as a stark warning to other inmates. Under Loritz's command, public executions became a common occurrence at Sachsenhausen. These executions were carried out in a manner that maximized the psychological impact on the other prisoners. Hangings and shootings were often conducted in full view of the camp population, serving as a brutal reminder of the consequences of disobedience or attempts to resist. The torture at Sachsenhausen was not limited to physical violence. Loritz also employed a range of psychological tactics to break the will of the prisoners. Mock executions, solitary confinement, and relentless harassment were part of the daily terror that inmates faced. These methods were designed to instill a constant state of fear and anxiety, making it clear that any form of resistance would be met with severe consequences. One of the most egregious aspects of Loritz's brutality was his treatment of Jewish prisoners. Reflecting the escalating anti-Semitic policies of the Nazi regime, Loritz subjected Jewish inmates to the harshest conditions and most severe forms of abuse. They were often singled out for particularly cruel punishments and were subjected to incessant humiliation and degradation. The conditions at Sachsenhausen under Loritz were inhumane and lethal. Overcrowding, starvation, and disease were rampant within the camp. The sanitary conditions were appalling, leading to outbreaks of typhus and other infectious diseases. The lack of adequate medical care meant that many prisoners died from illnesses that were either deliberately left untreated or exacerbated by the brutal camp conditions. Forced labor was another cornerstone of Loritz's regime at Sachsenhausen. Prisoners were made to work in various industries within and around the camp, often under conditions that were designed to be as punishing as they were productive. The labor was grueling, with prisoners forced to work long hours without adequate rest, nutrition, or protective gear. The work was not only a means of economic exploitation, but also a tool of physical and mental exhaustion. Loritz's systematic brutality extended to experiments on human subjects. Sachsenhausen became a site for medical experiments that were conducted without the consent of the prisoners. These experiments, often carried out under the guise of medical research, were in reality cruel and inhumane procedures that resulted in immense suffering and, in many cases, death. Corruption and downfall. While Hans Loritz's tenure as commandant of Sachsenhausen concentration camp was marked by extreme brutality and strict adherence to Nazi ideology, it was also characterized by rampant corruption, which eventually led to his downfall. This chapter of his life reveals a complex picture of a man who, while mercilessly enforcing the regime's oppressive policies, simultaneously engaged in widespread corruption for personal gain. Loritz's corruption took many forms, from embezzlement and theft to the exploitation of prisoners for personal projects. One of his most egregious acts of corruption was the construction of a luxurious villa near Salzburg. This project, built with materials and labor stolen from the Dachau concentration camp, highlighted Loritz's audacity and disregard for the resources meant for the camp. He used prisoners, primarily Jehovah's Witnesses, as a workforce for this personal project, housing them in nearby prisons at night. This villa was not just a symbol of Loritz's corruption. It was also a hub for further illicit activities. Loritz often invited select SS officers to the villa for leisure and recreation, cementing a network of corruption and patronage within the ranks of the SS. These gatherings were extravagant and in stark contrast to the dire conditions in the concentration camps. Loritz's corrupt practices extended beyond personal enrichment. He was involved in the systematic looting of prisoners' possessions, including valuables such as gold, jewelry, and money. These items were often sent to various SS officers and other Nazi officials, further entrenching the culture of corruption within the camp system. The exploitation of forced labor for personal gain was another aspect of Loritz's corrupt practices. Under his command, prisoners were made to produce furniture, wrought iron works, and other items, not for the camp's operation or the Nazi war effort, but for Loritz's personal use or for sale on the black market. This abuse of prisoners' labor for personal profit was a blatant violation of even the twisted standards of the concentration camp system. Despite his adherence to Nazi ideology, Loritz's rampant corruption eventually caught the attention of his superiors. In 1939, his actions came to light, and he was removed from his position at Sachsenhausen. His removal was not due to his brutality or the atrocities committed under his command, but because of his corruption and the risks it posed to the image and operations of the SS. Following his removal from Sachsenhausen, Loritz was transferred to a less prominent role within the SS. This demotion, however, did not mark the end of his corrupt activities. In his new position, Loritz continued to exploit his power for personal gain, engaging in further embezzlement and illegal activities. Loritz's downfall was a reflection of the broader corruption within the Nazi regime. While the SS publicly espoused values of loyalty, discipline, and sacrifice, the reality was often quite different. Corruption was rampant, with many officers engaging in similar practices as Loritz, albeit perhaps not as blatantly. The exposure of Loritz's corruption also highlighted the internal power struggles within the Nazi hierarchy. His removal was as much about internal politics and the consolidation of power as it was about his corrupt activities. The Nazi leadership, particularly Heinrich Himmler, was keen to maintain a facade of integrity and discipline within the SS, and Loritz's blatant corruption threatened this image. The final years and legacy of Hans Loritz. As the Second World War approached its tumultuous end, the final years of Hans Loritz's life were marked by a desperate attempt to evade the consequences of his actions. This chapter delves into the waning days of his authority, his subsequent flight from justice, and the enduring dark legacy he left behind. After being removed from his post at Sachsenhausen in 1939 due to his corrupt practices, Loritz's career in the SS took a downward turn. He was reassigned to a less prominent position, far from the direct control of a concentration camp. This demotion, however, did not signify the end of his influence or the cessation of his brutal methods. Even in a reduced capacity, Loritz continued to serve the Nazi regime, upholding its oppressive policies until the very end of the war. As the tide of war turned against Germany, Loritz, like many high-ranking Nazi officials, became increasingly concerned about his fate should the Allies prevail. His role in the atrocities of the concentration camp system made him a prime target for prosecution for war crimes. In the chaos of the war's final months, Loritz saw an opportunity to escape the reckoning that was swiftly approaching. In April 1945, with the Nazi regime crumbling and Allied forces closing in, Loritz fled to Sweden using forged papers. His escape was a testament to the desperation and fear that had gripped many former Nazi officials as they faced the prospect of accountability for their crimes. In Sweden, Loritz hoped to find refuge and avoid the justice that was being meted out to his compatriots. However, Loritz's freedom was short-lived. He was arrested and extradited to Germany, where he was to be tried for his role in the Holocaust, particularly for the atrocities committed under his command at Sachsenhausen. The prospect of standing trial and potentially facing the death penalty was a stark reversal of fortune for a man who had once wielded such power and instilled fear in so many. As Loritz awaited trial, the full extent of his crimes began to come to light. Survivors of Sachsenhausen and other camps where he had served gave harrowing accounts of the brutality they had endured. The testimonies painted a picture of a man who had committed unspeakable atrocities, driven by ideological fanaticism and a ruthless pursuit of power. Before he could be brought to trial, however, Loritz took his own life in January 1946. His suicide was seen by many as a final act of cowardice, a refusal to face the consequences of his actions. For the survivors of the camps and the families of the victims, Loritz's death denied them the justice they had long awaited. The legacy of Hans Loritz is a stark reminder of the darkest aspects of human nature and the catastrophic consequences of unchecked power. His tenure as a commandant of Sachsenhausen is emblematic of the cruelty and inhumanity of the Nazi concentration camp system. He remains a symbol of the brutality and corruption that characterized the regime he served.